Asymptomatic transmission has been an underlying justification for the lockdowns. This is why it matters, guys. So many decisions are being made all about this virus based on this so-called asymptomatic transmission. This is why people go into stores and they wear a mask. This is why people are scared half to death of their fellow human, because they think they're going to get infected by another human being. And so it's great that they did this study. The problem is they've already given a lot of these powers to these government entities to justify lockdowns. And there's many states here in America that have used it. California, Michigan, New Jersey, New York. I mean, I could go down the line, Virginia, all these states that have decided to lock people down. And the new presidential administration has promised that he's going to be very strict about these kinds of things too, to get this, quote, under control. But this new study kind of pushes back on that. The most recent guidance from the Centers for Disease Control states that the virus can be spread by people who do not have symptoms. That's right on the website right now of the CDC. In fact, the CDC claims that asymptomatic people are estimated to account for more than 50% of transmissions. Now, what was that stat I just quoted to you? 0.00003%? That's far cry from 50%. And yet they're trying to make it look like if you don't have symptoms, oh, you could be sick, but I'm not sick. Oh, but you could pass it on as an asymptomatic transmitter. That makes no damn sense at all. Like, it never has made any logical sense. The UK Health Secretary Matt Hancock also was promoting this message, explaining that the concept of asymptomatic spread of 9-1 DIVOC was what led to the UK advocating masks and referring to the problem of asymptomatic transmission. So if you're just joining us, I am reading about a brand new study published in the journal Nature Communications, and it's all about asymptomatic spread of 9-1 DIVOC. Is it real? Is it not real? And they're finding that of the 10 million people, they looked at 10 million people in Wuhan, China, 10 million people who were asymptomatic carriers of 9-1 DIVOC. Of the 10 million, they only transmitted it to 300 people, which is 0.00003% transmission rate, which means 99.99997% it's not transmitting. I don't know about you, 99.99997% is pretty damn good odds. I'll take those on pretty much anything in my life. Pretty much anything. This new study, which we'll get to here in a minute, debunks that concept of asymptomatic transmission. It stated that out of the nearly 10 million people, 300 asymptomatic cases were found. Contact tracing was then carried out. Of those 300, no cases of 9-1 DIVOC were detected in any of the people that were exposed to these people who had 9-1 DIVOC. There were a total of 1,174 close contacts of the asymptomatic positive cases traced, and they all tested negative for the virus. Both the asymptomatic patients and their contacts were placed in isolation for 2 weeks, and the results were exactly the same. Think of all the people who have had to quarantine, and they were asymptomatic the entire time. Didn't lose their smell or taste, didn't have any cold symptoms. They're just sitting, and because of the protocol, you were contact traced, you had to be in quarantine for 2 weeks. I think it's down to 10 days now, but 2 weeks in quarantine because you supposedly got close to someone who's been diagnosed with 9-1 DIVOC. But you never had any symptoms. Now, they never even test these people. Do you have 9-1 DIVOC? And I've been thinking about and watching all of these football players, college and professional this year, that one guy on the team gets it. I remember one team, I forget which one, but one team, I think it was the Cleveland Browns, their entire starting wide receivers, all 4 of them, were contact traced because one of them got 9-1 DIVOC. So all 4 of them were out of their game yesterday that they played in the NFL. And it's like, it's just ridiculous if these guys aren't sick. Why are we quarantining people that are not sick? None of the detected positive cases or their close contacts became symptomatic, nor did they have any newly confirmed 9-1 DIVOC during the isolation period. And you would think if the so-called asymptomatic transmission were true, that we would see a whole lot more cases of this happening, but it's not. Further evidence showed that virus cultures in the positive and repositive asymptomatic cases were all negative, indicating that there was no viable virus in positive cases that were detected in the study. They couldn't find it, guys. It wasn't there, which begs the question, if this is the justification for why they are locking us all up in our homes on lockdown, why are we believing them anymore? Right? I'm ready for people to start thinking logically about this. And I don't think we've done enough logic thinking on any of this the entire time. And I think we're coming up on the 1 year of being through all this. I hope people with common sense wake up and look at what's happening. I mean, you do you, boo, and you figure out how to take care of yourself and make sure you're taken care of. But at the end of the day, if they're justifying keeping people locked down, if they're justifying not opening up businesses because of the so-called asymptomatic transmission of this virus, they're going to have to come up with something else, because this ain't it. Ages of those found to be asymptomatic were between the ages of 10 and 89. So they had a nice cross-section of ages from children all the way to very old, with the asymptomatic positive rate being lowest in children under the age of 17 and the highest rate amongst those over 60. The study also made the realization that due to a weakening of the virus itself, newly infected persons were more likely to be asymptomatic and have a lower viral load than earlier infected cases. And that's interesting. Like, as this thing has gone along, it's become weaker. So that even if you were a carrier of 9-1 DIVOC and you had no symptoms, if you were to pass it on to someone else, it would be a portion of that whatever's in your body. It wouldn't even be the full viral load. They're not going to really have any detectable signs of the virus. These results are not without precedent, though. Back in June, Dr. Maria Van Kerkhove, the head of the World Health Organization's Emerging Diseases and Zoonosis Unit, shed doubt upon asymptomatic transmission. Even Dr. Fauci, I remember seeing a video, this was many months ago now, but I remember seeing a video where somebody was interviewing him about the asymptomatic cases. He's like, oh, it's very rare that we see asymptomatic transmission of a virus. Generally, it's only people showing symptoms of the virus that tends to spread said virus. And I'm going, but the justifications for locking people down is all predicated on asymptomatic transmitters of the virus. Is anybody else over the duplicity of all of this year? No mask. Don't wear a mask. That's not going to help you with this. Oh, you need to wear a mask. Oh, asymptomatic transmission is, oh man, that's the worst part of this whole thing. Oh, asymptomatic? No, you're not going to pass this on. Back and forth and back and forth. And it gets so frustrating to the lay public who's just trying to do what's right, trying to take care of themselves and their family and be protected. And yet all they've done is made it more convoluted than they needed to. And sometimes I think they're flying by the seat of their pants with all this stuff. From the data we have, it still seems to be very rare that an asymptomatic person actually will transmit onward to a secondary individual. She then repeated the words, it's very rare. And despite the word choice of rare, they could not point to any singular case of asymptomatic transmission, noting that numerous reports were not finding secondary transmission onward. I would love it, and this is one study, but I would love it for other studies to happen here in America where they say there's hot spots here in America. Go to those hot spots and let's do this exact same study. Let's look at people who've been diagnosed with 9-1 DIVOC, which I could get into all the problems with the PCR test. I probably will do a future Jimmy Rants just on the PCR test and the flaws. I've touched on it a little bit here and there, but I need to do a whole episode just on that. But let's assume they're accurate and they're true. Let's do a study of all those people who test positive that are asymptomatic, and then contact trace those people, and let's see, of the people that they were in contact with, how many of them test positive for 9-1 DIVOC. And you're going to be shocked at how it's going to be a whole lot of nothing, even though they tell us this thing is spreading like wildfire because of asymptomatic transmission. If you're just joining us, welcome to Jimmy Rants. Welcome to Monday. Hope you had a great holiday weekend. We are here today with an episode all about a brand new study that just came out. And it says there is no such thing, it just doesn't exist, of asymptomatic spread of 9-1 DIVOC. I've got the paper we'll look at here in a second, but we're reading about the paper now. It was published in the journal Nature Communications, all about this so-called asymptomatic transmission of 9-1 DIVOC. 10 million people looked at, and of those 10 million, only 300 were found to be transmitting of the disease, and it's a very minuscule amount. It's basically statistically zero. So these comments go against the predominant narrative justifying lockdowns, and at the time, the American Institute for Economic Research highlighted that this undermined the last bit of rationale that could be in place for lockdowns, mandated masks, social distancing, and the entire apparatus of compulsion and coercion under which we've been living all year long. Swift to act, the World Health Organization did a U-turn and declared asymptomatic transmission was a really complex question. We don't really have the answer yet. Well, yeah, we do. It doesn't exist. And I would love it if there's more researchers that would try to replicate this. Show us how people going to a gym is spreading this virus. There was one gym in New York State that took their case to their Supreme Court in the state of New York, and they won their case. I'll probably do a highlight of this maybe on Ask Me Anything on Friday, but I have a story about this case where they said, hey, it's not fair that you've got to shut down. You have no evidence that we're spreading this virus. I know Ian Smith over in New Jersey, same thing with his gym. There's a lot of businesses that are like, enough is enough. Like, you're pointing the fingers at restaurants and gyms and movie theaters as spreading this virus, but there's no evidence of it. And their justification has been this asymptomatic transmission. The World Health Organization goes on to say, I think that's a misunderstanding to state that asymptomatic transmission globally is very rare. It's only referring to a small subset of studies. However, this new study out of Wuhan seems to present solid scientific evidence that asymptomatic transmission is not just rare, it doesn't exist at all. Given that it found no evidence that the identified asymptomatic positive cases were infectious, the study raises important questions about why we're still in lockdown anywhere. Is this important, guys? Like, I think this is so important. We need to get it out there, and we need people to understand the justification they're making for locking people down in their homes and making you wear a mask and making you socially distance is all predicated on this notion that there is an asymptomatic transmission of 9-1 DIVOC. What if there's not?